From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Hello, everyone. I think we'll get started. We have a good crowd tonight. My name is Robert Casper. I am the head of the Poetry and Literature Center here at the Library of Congress, and I would like to welcome you to tonight's program featuring Karl Ove Knausgaard. We are presenting tonight's program with the European Division at the Library and in collaboration with the Royal Norwegian Embassy in Washington. And I would like to put out a special thanks to Pia Dahl for all her hard work to make tonight happen. His Excellency Vegard Stroman, Norway's ambassador to the United States, will be introducing tonight's author. The Library of Congress is proud of its approximately 60,000 titles from or about Norway. We have hundreds of monographs on Norwegians in the United States and on Norwegian Americans. Approximately 1,000 volumes from or about Norway arrive at the library every year. The Library of Congress has a combined total of approximately 900 volumes by and about the Nobel Prize winners Knut Hamsun, Bjørn Stjerne Bjørnson, and the historical novelist Sigrid Undset. For Henrik Ibsen alone, the library has more than 1,200 volumes, so Mr. Knausgaard's works are an excellent company here. Let me tell you a little bit about the Poetry and Literature Center and the European Division in our collaboration. We've done a number of programs here throughout the year, and we'll continue to do programs into the summer and next fall. To find out about us and to sign up online for emails for our future events, you can visit www.loc/poetry and www.loc.gov/poetry and www.loc.gov/RR/European, respectively. I'll explain how the event will work. First, Mr. Knausgaard will read after his introduction by the ambassador, and then a European Division reference librarian, Teru Spiegel, will lead a moderated discussion. We'll leave plenty of time for a question and answer, and finally, we will have a book signing. I'd also like to note that refreshments and our reception is provided courtesy of the Embassy of Norway. Now that special moment, let me ask you to please turn off your cell phones and any electronic devices you have for the duration of the program. They do interfere with the audio equipment. And let me tell you too that the event is being recorded for further Library of Congress webcasts. So if you do ask a question, you will be on the recording. I would like to turn the program now over to His Excellency Vegard Stroman, Norway's ambassador to the United States. Ambassador Stroman came to Washington in 2007. Before that, he served as ambassador to the United Nations in Geneva and representative to the United Nations in New York, as well as on the UN Security Council. He was Norway's deputy foreign minister from 1999 to 2000. Trained as an international lawyer, he practiced law in Norway and in New York. Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much for those kind words. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It feels kind of awkward to stand here. It's actually James Madison who is looking down on you, and you could almost not imagine a grander person. You know, the only step up would probably be Thomas Jefferson, since he provided so many of the books in the early days of the Library of Congress. Can I only say it's a great pleasure for me to introduce Karl Ove Knausgaard tonight to you. Mr. Knausgaard epic work, My Struggle, is the greatest literary sensation in Norway, I would say, for many decades. His books have sold something, I believe, like 500,000 in a country of 5 million, which the equivalent in the United States would be 30 million. And I was hard-pressed to find almost anything short of the Bible that would come up with such numbers. Maybe Mark Twain, if you collected everything, I don't know. Now it's hard for a bad amateur poet like myself to introduce Mr. Knausgaard. I have published one poem in my lifetime consisting of 11 words. One poem, 11 words. Mr. Knausgaard only in his My Struggle sequence, and he wrote a couple of very well-known books before he came to My Struggle, consist of something like 3,700 pages. But let me only say this, without trying to sound like an expert, and I'm not, I'm a diplomat, I'm not really, I do my evening poetry only as a way of cleansing and clearing my mind. So let me only say one thing about the substance of his work. He has broken new ground in my view, of the understanding of the self reflected through other people's and through social contexts. That is not a new literary sort of line. It's been around for a while, but we haven't really seen it in this format and with this kind of language. And that is why I actually think that his work has attracted immense interest, not only in Norway, but now also throughout Europe, where his books are being translated. It's a huge success in Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, and just recently his books are released in the United Kingdom, and now we have come to America. We, as Norwegians, and at the Norwegian Embassy, and thank you to everyone who worked on this program, we want you to share in this sort of sensation. So thank you for coming tonight and sharing that with us. And hereby, I give you Karl Ove Knausgaard.
Thank you very much. I have to say I'm really curious about which 11 words it was that you, that you wrote. Maybe you can tell me later. It's a great pleasure for me to be here in Washington and do a reading of My Struggle, but it's also kind of very, very strange. I thought when I wrote this book that it was so private that not even my friends would be interested in it. And having it translated was the last thing I thought of, because this book is about me, it's about my father, my mother, my brother, my own life, and I tell something in this book that I haven't told a living soul before. So it was kind of very, very intimate. But what I have discovered is that it works exact opposite. If you go, the deeper you go inside yourself, then more general it became, then more relevance it has. Because reading is very intimate. It's one author and one reader, and that's it. It's one voice and one who is listening to that voice and in some way contributing her or himself into it. That's what literature is for me, and that's why that this project was possible. I'll open this reading by doing it in Norwegian, so you can have a taste of the original language, and so I can calm my nerves a bit, because my English is not too good. For hjertet livet enkelt. Det slår så lenge det kan. Så stopper det. Før eller siden, en eller annen dag, opphører denne stampende bevegelsen av seg selv, og blodet begynner å renne mot kroppens laveste punkt, og det samlet seg en liten kulp, synlig fra utsiden som et mørkt og bløtelig felt på den stadig hvitere huden. Alt mens temperaturen synker, lemmene stivner og tarmene tømmes. Disse første timenes forandringer foregår så langsomt og blir utført med en slik sikkerhet at de har noe nesten rituelt over seg. Som om livet kapitulerer ifølge bestemte regler, en slags gentleman's agreement, som også det dødes representanter retter seg etter, i det de alltid venter til livet har trukket seg ut før de starter invasjonen av det nye landskapet. Da er den til gjengjeld ugjenkallelig. De enorme svermene med bakterier som begynner å spre seg ut i kroppens indre, kan ingenting stanse. Hadde de forsøkt seg bare noen timer tidligere, ville de straks ha møtt motstand. Men nå er alt stille rundt dem, og de trenger stadig dypere inn i det fuktige og mørke. De når de haverske kanaler, de liberkynske krypter, de langerhanske øyer. De når Bowmans kapsel i Renes, Clarks søyle i spinalis, den svarte substans i mesencephalon. Og de når hjertet. Fortsatt er det intakt, men frarøvet bevegelsen som hele dets konstruksjon er innrettet mot, hadde noe underlig ødselig ved seg. Like et anlegg arbeiderne har måttet forlate i hui og hast, kunne man tenke seg. De urørlige kjøretøyene som lyser gult mot skogens mørke, brakkene som ligger tomme, vognene i taubanen som henger fullastede en etter en oppover fjellsiden. For the heart, life is simple. It beats for as long as it can. Then it stops. Sooner or later, one day, this pounding action will cease of its own accord, and the blood will begin to run towards the body's lowest point, where it will collect in a small pool, visible from outside as a dark, soft patch on ever-whitening skin. As the temperature sinks, the limbs stiffen, and the intestines drain. These changes in the first hours occur so slowly and take place with such inexorability that there is something almost ritualistic about them, as though life capitulates according to specific rules, a kind of gentleman's agreement to which the representatives of death also adhere, inasmuch as they always wait until life has retreated before they launch their invasion of the new landscape. By which point, however, the invasion is irrevocable. The enormous hordes of bacteria that begins to infiltrate the body's innards cannot be halted. Had they tried but a few hours earlier, they would have met with immediate resistance. However, everything around them is quiet now, as they delve deeper and deeper into the moist darkness. They advance on the Havers channels, the crypts of Lieberkühn, the isles of Langerhans. They proceed to Bowman's capsule in the Rennes, Clark's column in the Spinalis, the black substance in the Mesencephalon. And they arrive at the heart. As yet, it is intact, but deprived of the activity to which end its whole construction has been designed, there is something strangely desolate about it, like a production plant that workers have been forced to flee in haste, or so it appears, the stationary vehicle shining yellow against the darkness of the forest, the huts deserted, a line of fully loaded cable buckets stretching up the hillside. Now, this was the opening of the novel. And little did I know that it was the opening of a novel that would take me 3 years to write and be on 3,600 pages. All I wanted to do when I started out this project was to write about my father and my father's death. But I couldn't. I tried to do it as fiction, but I didn't believe in it. I tried for 3 years to write about his death, because that was the story from my life. I think everybody got one important story, and that was my important story. But then all of a sudden, just by coincidence, I started to write under his real name, using my own name, and making everything realistic and correct and try to describe it how it really happened. And then I knew I was something into, because this I believed in. But the problem was still how to address death, how to write about death. I couldn't just start a story where in its center. So I wrote this opening. It starts out in general. It's everybody's heart, everybody's body, everybody's death. And then slowly, slowly go down to the specific body, the specific heart, the specific death of my father. And I would like to read the introduction of him, the first time he's described in the book, where the main character, that's me, is 8 years old, and he's 32. And it goes like this. It's springtime, and I'm sitting alone in the house watching TV. A fishing smack sinks off the coast of northern Norway one night. The crew of 7 drown. Next morning, the event is described in all the newspapers. It is a so-called mystery. The weather was calm, and no mayday call was sent from the boat. It just disappeared. A fact which the TV stations underlined that evening by flying over the scene of the drama in a helicopter and showing pictures of the empty sea. The sky is overcast, the grey-green swell heavy but calm, as though possessing a different temperament from the choppy, white-flecked waves that burst forth here and there. I am sitting alone watching. It is sometime in spring, I suppose, for my father is working in the garden. I stare at the surface of the sea without listening to what the reporter says. And suddenly, the outline of a face emerges. I don't know how long it stays there, a few seconds perhaps, but long enough for it to have a huge impact on me. The moment the face disappears, I get up to find someone I can tell. My mother is on the evening shift, my brother is playing soccer, and the other children on our block won't listen, so it has to be Dad, I think, and hurry down the stairs, jump into shoes, thread my arms through the sleeves of my jacket, open the door, and run around the house. We are not allowed to run in the garden, so just before I enter his line of vision, I slow down and start walking. He is standing at the rear of the house, down in what will be the vegetable plot, lunging at a boulder with a sledgehammer. Even though the hollow is only a few meters deep, the black soil he has dug up and is standing on, together with the dense clump of rowan trees growing beyond the fence behind him, cause the twilight to deepen. As he straightens up and turns to me, his face is almost completely shrouded in darkness. Nevertheless, I have more than enough information to know his mood. This is apparent not from his facial expressions, but his physical posture, and you do not read it with your mind, but with your intuition. He puts down the sledgehammer and removes his gloves. Well, he says. I've just seen a face in the sea on TV, I say, coming to a halt on the lawn above him. The neighbor had felled a pine tree earlier in the afternoon, and the air is filled with the strong resin smell from the logs lying on the other side of the stone wall. A diver? Dad says. He knows I'm interested in divers, and I suppose he cannot imagine I would find anything else interesting enough to make me come out and tell him about it. I shake my head. It wasn't a person, it was something I saw in the sea. Something you saw, eh? He says, taking the packet of cigarettes from his breast pocket. I nod and turn to go. Wait a minute, he says. He strikes a match and bends his head forward to light the cigarette. The flame carves out a small grotto of light in the grey dusk. Right, he says. After taking a deep drag, he places one foot on the rock and stares in the direction of the forest on the other side of the road. Or perhaps he is staring at the sky above the trees. Was it Jesus you saw? He asks, looking up at me. Had it not been for the friendly voice and a long pause before the question, I would have thought he was poking fun at me. He finds it rather embarrassing that I am a Christian. All he wants of me is that I do not stand out from the other kids. And of all the teeming mass of kids on the estate, no one other than his youngest son calls himself a Christian. But he is really giving this some thought. I feel a rush of happiness because he actually cares, while still feeling vaguely offended that he can underestimate me in this way. I shake my head. It wasn't Jesus, I say. That's nice to hear, Dad says with a smile. Higher up on the hillside, the faint whistle of bicycle tires on tarmac can be heard. The sound grows, and it is so quiet on the estate that the low singing tone at the heart of the whistle resonates loud and clear, and soon afterward the bicycle races past us on the road. Dad takes another drag at the cigarette before tossing it half-smoked over the fence, then coughs a couple of times, pulls on his gloves, and grabs the sledgehammer again. Don't give it another thought, he says, glancing up at me. I was 8 years old that evening, my father 32. So this is the introduction of the father. And when I wrote this novel, I wrote it purely on intuition. I didn't plan anything, and I tried to avoid thinking, because if you write about yourself, you have certain concepts of yourself. Everybody knows who they are, and then it's hard to find any interest to write about it. So I wanted to get kind of away from my thoughts, away of my looking at the world and and all my relations at my father. So what I did, I just sat down and wrote wherever it take me. And the first 100 pages consist of maybe a couple of days in the life of a 16-year-old person, which is me, and nothing happens. 100 pages, nothing really happens. And I thought, when I have done that, it was possible to me to write about death. Because in that process, I developed a kind of a language for the everyday life. And it became true to me in a way that life consists of banality. Life consists of everyday's, experiences. Life consists of things you forget as soon as you've done it. I mean, who remembers how it was to do the dishwash a couple of hours ago? It just happens. And that's life. Things that just happens. In a novel, you construct plots, you construct, dialogues, and a kind of construction of the reality that I wanted to avoid. So my experience when my father died was that everything all of a sudden became meaningful. Everything around the death became meaningful. And I wanted to express that in a way. So I dealt with my father's death in the same way that I dealt with myself being 16. And I want to write the last part of the novel. But first I have to say how he died and why this story was so strong for me. Because when I grew up, he was a normal father. He was a local politician. He was a teacher. He collected stamps. And we lived, in a normal way of life. And then when he was 40, he left the family. And he started to drink. And 14 years later, he died. Under kind of terrible circumstances. Me and my brother went down to his house, and it was like the house of a drug addict or something like that. It was really, really terrible. And that's what the second part of this book is about. and I can't safely read the end of it because it's not a thriller. So, and when we came to the house, my grandmother was there. So my father and my grandmother has lived together for a couple of years, and she was in a state of shock. She was a bit senile and shocked because her oldest son has died in the living room just a couple of days before. So that's the situation. The sight of Dad's dead body had put me off any thought of food. But I could hardly associate a cup of tea with death, could I? I heated a pan of water on the stove, poured it, steaming over a tea bag in a cup, watched for a while as the color was released and spread in slow spirals through the water until it was a golden tint everywhere. And I took the cup and carried it onto the veranda. A long way out, at the mouth of the fjord, the Danish ferry was approaching. Above it, the weather has cleared. There were still traces of blue in the dark sky, which made it seem palpable, as though it were really one enormous cloth, and the stars I could see came from the light behind, shining through thousands of tiny holes. I took a sip and put the cup down on the windowsill. I remembered more from the last evening with my father. There had been a thick layer of ice on the sidewalk. An easterly wind had been sweeping through almost deserted streets. We had gone to a hotel restaurant, hung up our coats, and taken a seat at a table. Dad has been breathing heavily. He wiped his brow, picked up the menu, and scanned it. Started again from the top. "Looks like they don't serve wine here," he said and got up. Went over and said something to the head waiter. When he shook his head, Dad turned on his heel and came back, almost tore his jacket off the chair and was putting it on as he headed for the exit. I hurried after him. "What happened?" I asked when we were outside on the sidewalk again. "No alcohol," he said. "Jesus, it was a temperance hotel." Then he looked at me and smiled. "We have to have wine with our food, don't we? But that's fine. There's another restaurant down here." We ended up in Hotel Caledonian, sat at a window table and ate our steaks. That is, I ate. When I had finished, Dad's plate had barely been touched. He lit a cigarette, drank the last dregs of red wine, leaned back in the chair and said he was planning to become a long-distance truck driver. I didn't know how to react, just nodded without saying a word. Truckers had a great time, he said. He had always liked driving, always liked traveling, and if he could do that and get paid for it at the same time, why hang around? Germany, Italy, France, Belgium, Holland, Spain, Portugal, he said. Yes, it's a fine profession, I said. But now it's time for us to go our separate ways, he said. I'll pay. You just go. I'm sure you have a lot to do. It was good to see you. And I did as he suggested, got up, took my jacket, said goodbye, went out through the hotel reception area, onto the street, wondering briefly whether to get a taxi or not, decided against it, and ambled towards the bus station. Through the window I saw him again. He was walking through the restaurant toward the door at the far end that led to the bars. And once again, his movements, despite his large, heavy body, were hurried and impatient. That was the last time I saw him alive. I had a distinct impression that he had pulled himself together, that in those 2 hours he had summoned all his strength to stay in one piece, to be sensitive and present, to be what he had been. The thought of it pained me as I packed back and forth on the veranda, staring at the town and the sea. I considered whether to go for a walk into town, or perhaps to the stadium, but I couldn't leave Grandma on her own, and I didn't feel like walking either. Besides, Tomorrow, everything would look different. The day always came with more than mere light. However frayed your emotions, it was impossible to be wholly unaffected by the day's new beginning. So I took the cup to the kitchen, put it in the dishwasher, did the same with all the other cups and glasses, plates and dishes, poured in powder and started it, wiped the table with a cloth, wrung it, and draped it over the tap. Even though there was something obscene about the meeting between damp, crumpled rag and the tap's shiny chrome. Went into the living room and stopped beside the chair where Grandma was sitting. "I think I'm going to bed," I said. "It has been a long day." "Is it so late already?" she asked. "Yes, I'll be off soon as well." "Good night," I said. "Good night." I started to leave. "Karl Ove," she called. I turned back. "You're not thinking of sleeping up there tonight too, are you? It would be better for you downstairs, in our old bedroom, you know. Then you've got the bathroom next door." "That's true," I said, "but I think I stay where I am. We got all our things up there." "All right," she said. "You do as you like. Good night." "Good night." It was only when I was upstairs in the bedroom undressing that I realized it had not been for my sake that she had suggested I sleep down below, but for hers. I put my t-shirt back on, lifted the sheet, rolled the duvet into a ball, put it under one arm, grabbed the suitcase with the other, and made my way downstairs. I bumped into her on the first floor landing. "I've changed my mind," I explained. "It will be better downstairs, as you said." "Yes, good," she said. I followed her down. In the hall, she turned to me. "Do you have everything you need?" "Everything," I answered. Then she opened the door to a little room and was gone. The room I was going to sleep in was one of those we had not tackled yet, but the fact that her things, such as hairbrushes, rollers, jewelry and jewelry box, clothes hangers, nightgowns, blouses, underwear, toilet bags, cosmetics lay scattered around on bedside tables, the mattress, shelves in the open wardrobe, on the floor, on the windowsills, did not bother me in the slightest. I just cleared the mattress with a couple of sweeps of my hand, spread out the sheet and duvet, undressed, switched off the light, and got into bed. I must have fallen asleep at once. The next thing I remember is that I woke up and switched on the bedside lamp to look at my watch. It was 2:00. On the staircase outside the door, I heard footsteps. Still drowsy with sleep, the first thing that occurred to me, and presumably connected with something I had dreamed, was that Dad had returned. Not as a ghost, but in the flesh. Nothing in me refuted this notion, and I was frightened. Then, not right away, but somehow following up on this notion, I realized the idea was ridiculous and went into the hall. The door to Grandma's room was ajar. I looked in. Her bed was empty. I ascended the staircase. She was probably getting herself a glass of water, or perhaps she hadn't been able to sleep and had gone up to watch TV. But I would check there anyway to be on the safe side. First, the kitchen. She wasn't there. Then, the living room. Nor there. So she must have gone to the special occasion living room. Yes, she was by the window. For some reason, I didn't make my presence known. I paused in the shadow of the dark sliding door, watching her. It was as though she were in a trance. She was standing motionless, staring into the garden. Occasionally, her lips moved, as though whispering to herself, but not a sound emerged. Without warning, she whirled around and came toward me. I didn't have the wit to react, just watched her coming toward me. She passed by 1/2 meter away, but although her eyes flitted across my face, she didn't see me. She walked straight past, as if I were just a piece of furniture. I waited until I heard the door downstairs shut before following. Once back in my bedroom, I was afraid. Death was everywhere. Death was in the jacket in the hall, where the envelope containing my father's post-session was. Death was in the chair in the living room, where she had found him. Death was on the stairs, where they have carried him. Death was in the bathroom, where Granddad had collapsed, his stomach covered with blood. If I closed my eyes, it was impossible to escape the thought that the dead might come, just like in my childhood. But I had to close my eyes. And if I succeeded in ridiculing these childish notions, there was no getting past the sudden image of Dad's dead body. The interlaced fingers with the white nails, the yellowing skin, the hollowed cheeks. These images accompanied me deep into my light sleep in such a way that I couldn't say whether they belonged to the world of reality or dreams. Once my consciousness had opened in this way, I was sure his body was in the wardrobe, and I checked, rummaged through all the dresses hanging there, checked the next, and having done that, I went back to bed and continued sleeping. In my dreams, he was sometimes dead, sometimes alive, sometimes in the present, sometimes in the past. It was as if he had completely taken me over, as if he controlled everything inside me. And when at last I awoke at around 8, my initial thought was it had been a nocturnal visitation, and then that I had to see him again. 2 hours later, I closed the door to the kitchen, where Grandma was sitting, went to the phone and dialed the funeral director's number. Andernes Funeral Parlor? Hello, this is Karl Ove Knausgaard. I was at your office the day before yesterday with my brother about my father. He died 4 years ago. Yes, hello. As you know, we went to see him yesterday, but now I was wondering if it would be possible to see him again, a final visit, if you understand. Yes, of course. When would be convenient? Well, I said, sometimes this afternoon, 3, 4? Shall we say 3 then? 3's good. Outside the chapel. Okay, so it's set then. Excellent. Thank you very much. Not at all. Relieved that the conversation had been so unproblematic, I went into the garden and continued cutting the grass. The sky was overcast, the light gentle, the air warm. I finished at around 2 o'clock. Then I went back in to see Grandma and said I was going to meet a friend, changed clothes, and headed for the chapel. The same car was by the front door. The same man opened up when I knocked. He acknowledged me with a nod, opened the door to the room where we had been the day before, did not enter himself, and I stood in front of Dad again. This time I was prepared for what awaited me, and his body, the skin must have darkened even further in the course of the previous 24 hours, aroused none of the feelings that has distressed me before. Now I saw his lifeless state, and that there was no longer any difference between what once had been my father and the table he was lying on, or the floor on which the table stood, or the wall socket beneath the window, or the cable running to the lamp beside him. For humans are merely one form among many, which the world produces over and over again, not only in everything that lives, but also in everything that does not live, drawn in sand, stone, and water. And death, which I have always regarded as the greatest dimension of life, dark, compelling, was no more than a pipe that springs a leak, a branch that cracks in the wind, a jacket that slips off a clothes hanger and falls to the floor. Thank you.
Really, almost. Can you hear me? That was magical. We're so glad you can be here with us tonight. I would like to also thank the Embassy of Norway and the Norwegian Society for alerting us to the fact that your memoirs are being translated to English, because this has been a fabulous reading experience for me, and tonight was just special. And the fact now that you're here in the US means that you're an internationally known author. You're not only a huge success in Norway, but you are well known in many other countries. So why do you think it is that you're just so enormously compelling and so well known?
That's really hard for me to say, but my experience, which I did not experience with my first two books, is I got a lot of letters from readers. Readers I've never thought should read my books, especially elderly women, 90 years old, 80 years old, 70 years old, and from persons in prisons and so on. And they thanks me for the reading experience, and then they start to tell about their own lives. They go through their own lives, and I think that's what have happened in this book, because I'm not kind of want to tell stories from my life. I'm not interested in that at all. I'm interested in how it really is to exist, and I think everybody knows how it is to exist, and I think it's the same being 16 for everybody, more or less. Yeah. And I think also I've been criticized for being a narcissist and being totally occupied with myself and so on and so on. But I do this in a language, and it's not my language, it's everybody's language, And in this book, I describe music, art, relations to people. Everybody can relate to a father, everybody can relate to a mother. And the culture, it's everybody's culture. So I think we maybe are 99% alike and 1% different, 1% of your own. And that's, I think, is just the presence, the feeling of being you. But I'd never thought of this when I wrote the book. Right. Then I was more ashamed of doing it, because I thought nobody would be interested in it, not even my editor. And this takes us all by surprise. The publishing house, me, everybody, no one expected this to happen at all. So it has been really, really strange experience for everybody involved.
Yeah. You said you were ashamed?
Yes. I was ashamed every day, 3 years, doing this.
Very interesting.
And so what I did, I have a friend. He's a good friend, he's a writer as well. So I read to him every day. I have read 5,000 pages to him. And all I needed him to say was, "This is good, keep on." And I'm an editor, sent it to him, "This is good, keep on, keep on." If not, I wouldn't have the strength to do it, because it's really shameful to write about yourself, your own life in details, You shouldn't do it, it's really forbidden. And it's, who are you doing this? Who do you think you are? I haven't had a specific interesting life, I think. It's normal life, And that's the whole point. Everybody has normal lives.
Well, if somebody had told me that I was going to be rushing home every night reading about somebody growing up in southern Norway, I wouldn't have believed them, because
No,
I grew up in southern Finland, and it was an even less happening place. And you talk about this getting into the sort of universal, the archetypal experience almost, and you have said that writing is drawing the essence of what we know out of the shadows. That is what writing is about. And you mentioned all the humiliation and the shame and the pain, and so it must have been a painful process then, or no?
It's not. I retell a story of my father's death. The retelling was not painful.
It was not painful?
No, the painful thing was the death, right? The painful thing about writing was just that I don't have no confidence in writing, and I have very high ideals. I'm kind of obsessed with high arts, with high quality literature, high quality art, and I have kind of quite clear concept of what that is. And that concept collides completely with my everyday life. So that's why it's called my struggle as well. There's a collision between what we want things to be, what we want our lives to be, and what is actually are, you know? And there's a lot of energy in that collision.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the title. Now, in English, it's called My Struggle,
Yes.
but in Norwegian, it's Min Kamp,
Yes.
which sounds a little bit like that notorious work, Mein Kampf.
Yes,
And-
it's of course the title.
Right. So, what was your thinking when you chose the title?
I had kind of a working title, 2 working titles. One was Argentina, which is a really bad title. No one wants to buy a book called Argentina. And the other was, I don't know it in English. Papegøye, what er det for noe?
Parrot.
Parrot Park, the Parrot Park. That was the other title, just as working titles. And then in a conversation, we were talking about Mein Kampf. And then my friend said to me, there's your title. And I knew that's my title. Because you think of Mein Kampf, you think of Hitler, the Nazis, and so on and so on. But it has a specific meaning. It's my, and it's struggle. Yes.
Yes.
So I want kind of to take it back, and this is the struggle. It's an everyday life struggle. It's a struggle with raising your children. It's a struggle with your parents. It's a struggle. I mean, that's the, and that title shaped the novel, because then it kind of give it a form. And in the last book, this is 6 books, and in the last book I had to write about Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler. And then I wrote an essay on 450 pages about that book, which I wouldn't have done if I hadn't choose the title, you know?
Yeah.
That's intuition, and then someone, in the end, everything is connected.
Yes.
And it feels like, yeah, that's the way this has worked. But of course, it's also a kind of a provocation. I was very frustrated when I wrote this, and there is, it's a way of saying, stay away from this, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I found some dark humor in your work that was very much appreciated. Now, a lot has been said about your description, your detailed description of your family and then how they reacted. Is that something you'd like to comment on?
Yes, I was doing this quite very innocent. I was very innocent or naive when I did this. I wrote about myself, and I thought, these are facts of life. No one would get hurt of this. And then when I've done the writing, I sent it out to everyone I've been mentioned in the novel. And some of them mostly said it's okay. But some of them said, this is impossible. If you do this, I'm going to sue you. So what we did, I go maybe a month, I have discussion with myself and with my friends and with my editors and with lawyers to read it, because that was the family to my father. And I describe my father's fall, and it's of course shameful, and it's kind of a family secret. And who am I to write a novel about that? I mean, it's obviously hurted them, and what I did was saying to myself, to twist this around, who can refuse me to write about my father? Is that possible? It's my father, it's my story. He created me, I'm writing about him. This conflict is impossible to have a solution on. It's impossible. So we are still at the same. They won't talk to me, we have no contact. And I know I have harmed them. And I didn't want to do it, but I had to be true to my own life. That's how it is.
Well,
so what he's saying, do you think your own life is more, your literature is more important than our real lives? That's a moral and ethic dilemma of huge proportions. But at the same time, I think this isn't a hateful portrait. And it's not about giving someone away or to take revenge or something. It's about humanity, and these things happen. And it's not shameful. It's not shameful to be an alcoholic. It's not shameful to be in a shock and so on and so on. But this is partly a reason of why this book became so intensely discussed. That's one of the aspects, and I think the most important one.
Right. Well, you certainly don't spare yourself in the book either.
No,
so
no.
I felt that it was a very fair description, and I think every family has these sorts of secrets, and
yes,
so
if they do.
It was cathartic for me. And now, Rob, I think maybe we should turn the question and answer period over to the audience, and yeah. The mic? Okay, so we'll pass around the mics for question and answer, yeah.
Okay.
Hi, I'll break the ice. I wasn't going to speak, but anyway. As I was listening to your wonderful reading, I was trying to look for the structures and the models that you may have employed because it's so autobiographical and yet you're turning it into a fiction. And so I was wondering, this is, you know, like Bergman gets together with Poe and Marcel Proust and decide to write a memoir, you know, about early childhood. I don't know. That's the image that came into my head. So my question is, what kind of structural examples and ideals that you spoke about influenced your work?
It's really hard to say, but I think, I mean, the scope of it, I mean, the big canvas, that's obviously from Proust. And what I really like about him is the feeling you got that you have a generation rising slowly through time and then dying. And you got, he needed 3,000 pages to make that movement. And when I was 19, I was trying to write a novel. And I went to a writing course. I wrote maybe 6 pages a day. And then I came there, and then the way of thinking of literature was, is it bad? Take it away. Is it bad? Take it away. This is not good? Take it away. Take it away. Take it away. So you get a kind of a minimalistic prose. And I was stuck there for 10 years. I felt like I had a kind of a, there was no correspondence between my inner life and what I was writing. And then suddenly I tried to do the opposite. If it's bad, write more. If it's bad, write more. So my first novel was 700 pages. And this is aesthetics, you know, this is how things deform and so on. But you say something with aesthetics as well. There is a kind of and writing so long was kind of a coincidence. But I had written about my father and knew I had a language for the everyday life. And I wanted to go on, keep on. And in the second book, it's maybe the same structure, but then it's not death that everything gravitates around and that gives everything meaning, but love. I mean, falling in love, having children, and so on. And it works the same way with everyday life, a sea of banalities, and then something really strong there. And so this just happened. But Proust has been very important for me. But I think this is, I've heard this be called the Norwegian Proust, which is a contradiction in terms. It's impossible to combine those two. And it's also very embarrassing because his prose, it's so elegant and he's so, you know, everything is kind of perfect in that novel. And you can read it again and again and again through your whole life, and it will still be something you can put out of it. And this book I've written is written very raw, very in a rush, so to speak. So it's no elegance in there. So, yeah.
Something that struck me was the kinetic energy in it, very cinematographic is what I was trying to say at the beginning. And I wonder if, I mean, that's very 20th century, not Proustian. I wonder if you could comment on that, and then I'll shut up.
Yes, it's a very visual novel. Yes, and I have a feeling that the world is disappearing. That the physical, concrete world is disappearing because everything is pictures and everything we relate to are going on somewhere else. We see it on TV, we are not there. We see it on the internet, we are not there. The kind of the presence of here and now are disappearing. We are on the phone, we are not talking to someone here, you know. And I wanted in this novel to be as detailed and try to evoke the presence of the room or of the people in the room as much as I could. And then I just started to describe things, how they look, you know, and so on and so on. So that's why. So I don't see words when I write or sentences, or I just see images. And it's the same when I read, I see images. And yes, that's basically how it is.
Favorite American writer, your favorite German writer, and your favorite English writer?
My favorite At the moment, my favorite English novel is by Adam Thorpe called Ulverton. I think it came out in 85, 86 or something, which is a brilliant, very, very good and very un-British novel. Have you read it? It's about one village. I think it's 8 chapters about that village. It starts in 16th century, ends up in our time. It's magic book. My favorite American novel at the moment would be one of Don DeLillo's early novels called The Names, which is untypically for him set in Athens, in Greece, and it's a fantastic novel. And it has a kind of a mythology layer, the modern world, and then something archaic or mythologic going on underneath it. So it's a brilliant novel. My favorite German writer has to be Hölderlin, the poet, which I tried to read for many, many years, couldn't read him, impossible, didn't get it. Then I fell in love. I get kind of almost manic, and then I could relate to him, then I could read him. So it's like, because he's kind of a poet of the intensity of being here and now, that's what he does better than anyone else I can think of. So I think he's the greatest poet of all times.
Comment that the translation is wonderful. Being Norwegian and also reading it in English, the translation is just simply magical.
I'll tell the translator that you said so. I agree.
Thanks for a good reading. I'm Norwegian, and I have followed your success in Norway, living here in the US. And you said something about that it was hard to publish this in Norway also because in Norway you're not supposed to be big or a narcissist, or, and sometimes I've thought that maybe, this book belongs in the United States. That because people here, they like to think of themselves in a little bit larger terms. Can you, have you thought about that?
No, I haven't. But I think, I think there is kind of a resistance to, and if you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't take that place, and that's necessary energy in the book to, to go through there. So maybe maybe no one is going to notice that energy here because it's so common. I don't know.
I was just curious about why you were going to name it Argentina.
That's because this is about life and fiction, interwoven in a certain way. And for me, Argentina has always been the country I've dreamed of. I think it started in the World Cup in 1978, saw the football stadiums and the colors and everything, being 10 years old. And then when I grew up, I read Borges, which is one of my favorite novelists, and Gombrowicz, the Polish writer, who did his diaries, which is one of the classics from the last century. He lived in Argentina, and Argentina was kind of a dream country for me, and I've never been there. That was why I thought, okay, this is what I'm going to call it. But it, of course, wouldn't have worked at all. But that was why.
If there's room for this question, I would like to ask it. You were talking about that we are 99% alike and 1% different. And I'm very curious to know, what is the 1% that makes you different from me or from other persons?
I think one of the things I wrote about in the book is a reflection over seeing a picture of Rembrandt in his old days. This is the same year he died. And I've seen that picture many times. It's in London, in National Gallery there. And when I see that, it's magic. It's from the 16th century. It shouldn't be any relation at all, but I relate to him. It's like I see his soul, and I can see my same soul. I cry when I see that picture. And I think what's different, the difference, I think this is the feeling of the self, the thing you wake up to in the morning, and the thing you I mean, who disappears when you sleep, the feeling of being you. I mean, before your thoughts, before your, that's you, that's the 1%. And that's, I think, but I don't know, but that's how I feel, you know? Everything else is relations, connections, and so on, but that feeling is kind of, the feeling of being me is, I guess, is unique. And having this body in this room, and this perspective on the world, which you can't escape from, except in literature and except in art.
Okay, I think our time is almost up, and I just had one last question. When can we expect more English translations from volume 2 to 6?
Number 2 is, I think, is coming out next year. The translation is almost finished, and then it will come out in the USA just after that.
Okay.
And I just bought the number 3 and number 4, so it's 4 titles coming out, 1 each year, I think.
So a lot to look forward to. So we are now going to have you sign books at the back of the room. There, I don't know if all the books have been sold. No, I think there's still some there, and you may purchase the books and have the author sign. And the refreshments will be ready. And thanks again for everybody, and especially the Embassy of Norway.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.